Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.
Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome to Little Slaw YouTube channel. And this is me, your Vasant Shanmugam. So in this video, we are going to see about inserting data into the table. So for inserting data into the table, we use the syntax which is insert into. So this is the syntax for inserting values into the table, and that is insert into, and then the table name. So here, for example, we take persons as a table name, and then let's give the column names, such as column 1, column 2, and then the values, which is value 1, value 2. So this is a simple syntax. So here we are inserting into the table name. So let me change it to table name. And then for the column 1 and for the column 2, say for example, the table name, the table has two columns, one is column 1 and column 2, then we insert the values which is value 1 and value 2. And this is the simple syntax for the table name. So now in this video we will see, so we have discussed about the previous 6 constraints in our previous video. So in this video we will see how to insert the values with all these constraints. So the first constraint is going to be not null, and on top of it we'll see about this auto increment as well. So let me comment this. So now we have this first table which has the, let me change the name to not null underscore 1. So this is going to be the first table, table 1. So this is going to be the table 1, which is not null. So not null is a constraint which we are going to see here. And then we have the values, which is the ID, which is the user ID, which is a not null, an auto increment, and the name. And then we have the birth date and then the phone. So let's create the table now. So the first constraint is not null. So we have a table, which is the not null table 1. And in this we have the values, which is the ID, which is not null, and again a primary key. And then we have the name column, which has varchar, and then we have this not null. And then we have the date of birth, which is the date, and then we have the phone, which is again a not null. So let's create the table now. So we have created the table, and let's now enter the value. So let's try to enter the value. So for now, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to enter the value except without entering the ID. Let's see how does it work or what happens. So here I have given the name and then the birth date and then the phone number, and make sure whenever you give any varchar, just give it within quotes, and that's very important. If not, we will not be able to update the value or we will not be able to insert the value. So let me run this insert into query and let's see how does it work. So here we can see that this ID, the value ID or the column ID is being given as not null, so we are not able to enter it. So what we'll do is we will enter the value ID and then let's enter the value here. Let's run the SQL again, and here we can see that the value is updated or it is inserted into it. So here we have clearly seen, so since the value is mentioned as not null, we are not able to insert the value, or we are not able to insert the value. So since we have given the values as not null, we are not able to enter it. So for example, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this not null for the phone, and here in the variable, in the values I have removed it, and again in the values also I have removed it. The column I have removed the phone column, and in the values again I have removed the phone column. So so for now we will not be able to do it since we have not So we have already created the table. We'll check that in our next example. So for now, so far what we have did is we have created a table with not null, and when we try to enter the value, we are not able to enter it since it will not allow us to enter the not null value. So let's now move on to the second constraint. So let's keep it here. Copy it for the next one. So the next one is the primary key constraint. So here we have set up the ID as the primary key. So I think we have already seen that in this. So here it is the same. So we already seen that this is the primary key. So let's now move on to the third constraint, which is the unique constraint. So since the value is kept as unique, we will not be able to create another set of column with the same value. So let's try doing it. So for now, what we'll do is like, let's create the table. So this is the third constraint, which is the unique constraint. Let me create unique underscore table 3, and we are going to create a table with the ID, name, birth date, and the phone number should not be null, but it has to be unique. So let's create this table now. So we have created the table, which is the unique and table 3, and let's now insert the values inside it, and let's see how does it work. So we are going to insert the value into the table, and the table name is unique table 3. So we are inserting it into here, and then the ID, and we have name, we have date of birth, and then the phone number. And let's insert the value here. So since we are entering it for the first time, by default it is unique. So let's run it. So we are able to successfully enter the value, and let's enter it again. So here we can see that since we have mentioned the value is unique, we are not allowed to insert the value, and this is why we are not allowed to create our account with the same email ID or mobile number in any of the websites. It will tell us that this particular email ID or phone number is already registered with us, and try to create your account with a new user ID or with a new email ID or phone number. So that is what this unique does. So let's try with another example. So let me change this number, and when I enter it, so this again works for the primary key as well, since this primary key also should not be the same one. So if we enter it again, we will not be able to do it, since the first condition that is getting checked is the phone number. And when we change the phone number, the second constraint that is checked is the ID. So by default, the primary key is again carries the unique ID or unique constraint. So we will be able to enter only if the value is different from the other tables or from the other columns. Sorry, from the other columns, not from other tables, but make sure that particular value is not been already present in the same column. So let's now move on to the next constraint, which is the default constraint. So let's create this table now. So here we are creating this default user, which has the user ID as the primary key, and then the name, and then we have the date of birth and phone and the country value. So let's create this table. Let's create it now. and we have created the default user. And in this inserting the value, let us validate the default constraint. So what we're going to do is we are going to enter the column and the values. So I'm renaming the columns here, and then I'll enter the values. So the next thing is like what I'm going to do is I'm going to give only the user ID, the name, the date of birth, and the phone number. And since the country is a default constraint, I'm not going to enter the value. The user ID will start with 1001 and the name, and then we have the date of birth and the phone number. So let us insert the value now, and let's see how does it work. So here we have clearly seen that we have entered, or we are inserting only the user ID, the name, the date of birth, and the phone number. But by default, we could see the country has been added in the table. And let's try one more. We'll just change the values to make sure that we don't get caught in the primary key and the unique values. So here we can see, so for any number of times we enter the value, automatically the default constraint value. So here we have set the country as the default constraint and the United Kingdom as the default value. So automatically that value will get updated in the table. And now let's move on to the fifth constraint, which is the foreign key constraint. And here we have two tables. One is the create table data. So here we have two tables. One is the creating the table with the department, which is the department ID and the department name. And then we have the employee table, which has the department ID. And here we have referenced the department ID as the foreign key to the department ID in the employee table. So let's create each table one by one. First, we'll create the department table. So we have created successfully. And now let us create the other table, which is the employee table with the department ID as the foreign key. So we have created. So what we're going to do now is we are going to insert the values. So let's insert the values, and we have our syntax here, and let's move it now. So the first one is we are going to insert the values into the department table, and the first column is department ID and the second column is department name. And we don't have any other constraints apart from foreign key in this. It's just going to be the not null and primary key. And let's give the department ID as, so since it's mentioned as int, let's have the integer values and then the department name. So it's going to be test. And let's insert these values into the table. Let us enter a few more values. In here, so we have multiple department IDs, and let's now insert the values into the other table, which is the employee table, and the values are going to be employee ID, employee name, hiring date, and then we have the salary, and then the department ID. So we have to make sure that we have the same department ID which we mentioned in the department table. So let's start with the employee ID and then the employee name. Since it is a varchar, we have to enter it within quotes, and then the hire date. So we'll enter that in the format of date format. Then we have the salary. It's going to be 5,000. and then we have the department ID as the last value. So let us insert this value into the script. Let me change it here. So let's run this query and see. So we have entered the values now. And then let's create one more value. So since the employee ID is the unique key, we are not able to allow to enter. Okay. So here we have entered two different values, and the department ID is the foreign key. So whenever we do any extraction, we can use this department ID as a value, and then we can extract it. So let's now move on to the next and the last constraint, which is the check constraint. So for that, let's first create the table. So let's create the table for that, which is the employees table. And I'm running it. So we have the employees table here, and which has the employee ID, the employee name, the hiring date, the salary, department ID, and foreign key. So the check constraint is the important one here, and when we insert the value, so let's insert the values in here and let's see how does it work. So we have already set this. So the employee ID, employee name, everything is already set here. So we have the salary, which is 5,000, which is in between 3,000 and 10,000. So it's greater than 3,000 and less than 10,000. So let's enter the value and see how does it work. So here we can see that. So let's just do a quick check. Date, salary, department ID, everything is fine. Let's run this query again. Okay, so let's change the table name to employees and let's run the script again. So let's check this. So since while creating the table, we have created with a different name, we are not allowed to insert the value in here since we have referred it as a foreign key. So what we'll do is we will we'll drop this table and then we'll recreate it again. So drop table, employees, drop table employees, and we are going to drop this table and let's recreate it with a proper referencing code. So this is one of the main constraints. So if we refer any table or values with the different table name, and if that particular table name is not available, so automatically we will not be able to insert. And this is again a lesson learned for every one of us, that we have to be very careful while doing this referencing this foreign key value, because if this particular table that we are referencing is not in the table while we create, will not allow us to insert the value. So we have to make sure that while we create the table, we have to make sure that every dependent table is already available in the database. So let's now, so what we'll do is we will run this table. So now we have this department table with the department ID. So I think we are good to run this SQL, and we have executed it. We have got some syntax errors. So let's now execute this one, and we have created the employees table, and let's run our insert into and check how does it work. So here, so the previous time, since we did not refer the proper table, we were not able to insert the value, and now since we have properly referred the tables, we were able to insert the values successfully. So the check constraint, so that is the main thing which we have to check here. So check constraint, since the value is greater than 3000, the salary is greater than 3000, the salary is less than 10,000, we were able to enter it. So let's now do a small change. So I'm changing it to 1000. So the salary is going to be 1000 now. And we have changed everything else. And let's now enter the value and see. So here we can see automatically the exception has come up, which tells us that the check constraint has failed because the salary is not into the boundary values, which is 3000 and 10,000. So that's the reason the value has failed. And let's now make a small change and run it again and see how does it work. So automatically the value has successfully updated. So we are able to see the values in here. So with the value, the salary of 9,000. So I think in this video we saw about inserting the values, and also we also saw about how does the constraints work and how does the foreign key works with a clear example. So with this we come to an end. I believe this video would have been very useful to you. Until we meet you in another interesting video, it's bye-bye from Vasan Shanmugam and Little's Law.